And as we realize here, we're almost on the eve of a major election. That's quite a situation to think about. And I think that our prayers, God hears them, and I think they're the type of situation where, you know, we need to pray that God's will be done in this election. Now, I can tell you this: God's will be done, because it is God who raises up kingdoms, and it's God who takes them down. And so therefore, you know, we need to be mindful of that. And that's why I'm going to bring this message today. And I want you to turn to the 5th chapter of Daniel. Now, some of you may recognize this text. This is the story of Belshazzar, son of Nebuchadnezzar. And this story has great meaning. It has great meaning for the church. And it's obviously not a New Testament story, but it deals with the principles on how God feels about things. And we need to be mindful of this. And I believe it also has a great message for our country. Because I believe that the founding of this nation, the raising up of this nation, was nothing short than supernatural. Our nation is unique. It is a nation that is founded upon freedom and democracy, and it's a nation that has been purchased with blood. And that is very important to understand. So let's look together here in Daniel, the 5th chapter. I'm going to read this as quick as I can, and then we'll get into the message here. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords. Now imagine this party. A party for 1,000 of his lords. And drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes and his wives and his concubines might drink therein. Now we're talking about golden and silver vessels that had been dedicated for the use within the temple in Jerusalem. So this was serious. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, wives, concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver and brass and of iron and of wood and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Now, I want you to try to imagine this. Well, most of you have seen the Addams Family, okay? You got the hand, right? This is just the fingers of the hand, okay? And it's writing a message on the wall. Then the king's countenance, that's his face, his facial expression, okay, was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. Okay, so I mean, his hips were swaying, and his knees were knocking, and obviously, talk about striking fear into somebody. He was fearful. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers and the Chaldeans and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing, and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was the king Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. Now, I think they were astonished by how he was reacting. Okay? Now, the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, small g, so she didn't get it either, obviously. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. So, Daniel obviously held a very high position in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and he set him above all the other, and of course they're looking at it as he's just the chief magician or soothsayer or whatever. And we know the story on that. For as much was an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of the hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods in thee, and that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. Now, as we go on this story, you're going to know that he did more than just hear of Daniel. He clearly knew who Daniel was. He clearly, as a young man, seen and heard of the things that Daniel did. And he just chose to ignore them. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself. Daniel was just letting him know, I'm not for sale. My faith is not for sale. And my gifts are not for sale. Excuse me. And I think that's an important thing that we need to project in our own lives today. So give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom. Now notice what that says. He gave him a kingdom. Babylon. The ones who, took over God's people. He said sometimes God's people set in judgment. Sometimes kingdoms set in judgment because of their actions or inactions, their apathy, their indifference, whatever. But it goes on here. He gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. See, when God sets up a kingdom, the fact that God is setting it up, it comes with majesty, glory, and honor, because it is of God. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. Because you see, this is the way it is, folks. And we, the church of the living God, need to understand that when God is for you, who can be against you? And we can do all things with God, but we don't live it. We don't. He goes on here and he says, but when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed, from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And this is how his son came into play. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass and like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And make no mistake about it, whatever happens on Tuesday, God is still in charge. God is still in charge. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though, here it is, though thou knewest all this. Kind of puts me in mind of the first chapter of the book of Romans, how they knew God, but they did not desire to retain the knowledge of God. They wanted to do what they wanted to do. And that is the truth about people. There's no excuse. There's no excuse for anybody to say that there is no God, I don't know God, when God is all around us. And we see his mighty hand every single day. It is those of us who choose not to know him, not to do his will. That's where the problem is. But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords and thy wives and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. Thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, of iron, and wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. And so we do live in this world today where people worship and praise gold and silver and diamonds and wealth and power and position. That ought to be clearer to the American electorate than at any given time in the history of this great nation. That who cares about God? All I care about is power and position. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written. Mene, 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 tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Meaning, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Isn't that a picture of the way it is in this world today? When the plain truth is right in their face, but they can't see the forest for the trees. Well, verses 30 and 31. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. You know, I think about God's word, and I think about our country. We live in such a bubble in this country. We do. Because we live in a free nation. Yes, it has been purchased with blood. Next Sunday, we're going to honor our veterans. And it's a time to realize the price that has been paid for the liberty and freedom that we enjoy. In Leviticus 25:10, it says, proclaim liberty throughout the land. Isaiah 61:1 says, proclaim liberty to the captives. John 8:32 says, the truth shall make you free. You know, God, throughout the Bible, has used one nation to bring judgment on another nation or its leadership. And if you're a Bible student, you can't help but look around and see what's going on in this nation that has been blessed above virtually any nation on the earth. I mean, the freedom we enjoyed, even God's chosen people never enjoyed this type of a relationship. So, you know, the adage, to whom much is given, much shall be required, God's word, of course, that's a fact. I mean, it's a noble thing for free people to free people, okay, who are in bondage. You know, I am so sick and tired of hearing how bad our country is and how bad the things that we have done in this world. I'm sick of it. I can barely listen to it, and most of the time don't. Because this nation has done more to free people and to rebuild nations and to feed people and to take care of the natural disasters that have come upon people than any nation in history. The American people are very liberal in their giving to these type of things. But again, to whom much is given, much shall be required. I think today in this message, we're going to consider this text. It's a stern text, and it's a text for a very challenging time, okay? Israel's in captivity in Babylon. Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, is celebrating, and the mighty Babylon is about to be judged. You could look at that and look at this great nation of ours, and in some ways it could strike fear in your hearts. So let's look at this. What does the judgment of Babylon have to do with the land of the free and the home of the brave? I think the first thing that we have to think about here is the idea that this was a leadership, the leadership of Babylon at that point in time, it was a leadership without regard to God. Does this sound somewhat familiar? When we've been writing God out of our textbooks and we've taken prayer out of our schools, and we're supposed to just like completely forget about the founding of this country, and that we are a one nation under God. There's kids in schools today that aren't allowed to give a pledge of allegiance to the flag. Can't go to school with a flag on your shirt because might offend somebody. That offends me. That offends me. Belshazzar and his friends are having a party. What they're having is a drinking party. Okay? And they get so sauced up after a while that Belshazzar says, hey, go get those silver and gold chalices that Dad took out of the temple when we destroyed the place. And let's use those. Things that have been set apart for the service of God. And as the party, they ate, they drank, they were merry. All this was happening, but that night, Babylon would fall. All this merriment, all this unconcern for God, and that would be the night that the kingdom would fall. And who would have thought of it? Mighty Babylon, one of the absolute strongest military situations in the ancient world, full of splendor, just incredible situation. And so, in the ancient world, it was a city of beautiful homes and great defenses. And so, like many people today, in the good old U.S. of A., Belshazzar and his friends felt safe in their sinful ways. To believe that God doesn't care, you got to be a certain kind of stupid. Okay? I have a real hard time. Those of you who know me, my wife says I'm opinionated. I don't even know what she's talking about. No. But I can barely deal with some people. And after I listen to it, after a while, I say, are you stupid? Or are you just ignorant? Or is the lights on but no one's at home? What is it? How in the world can somebody buy into some of the stuff that people believe in this day and time? I don't understand it. But I will tell you this. You can be in a situation because of a failure of God's people in carrying the message of the gospel and standing up for what's true and right, even under persecution. It's even tough on Christian kids in school, And it is safer to just try to go along with the crowd. But one is never safe in sin. Never. Sin is the greatest single threat to our liberty is sinful behavior. However it manifests itself. But lying is a sin. Stealing is a sin. And I could go on, but I'm not going to get into that. You all know what I'm talking about. Our great nation, which is supposed to be one nation under God, or at least it could be said of it at one time, cannot continue on our present course. It cannot. I'm not so sure that God isn't going to judge this nation even at this point. I don't think it's too late if God's people will just stand up. And I'm going to tell you this, it's better to stand up for, I've always said it's better to stand for something than to fall for anything. But when it comes to God's people, we got to stand on the truth. So we have a leadership here with Belshazzar who has no regard for God. We have a leadership in our great nation that, for the most part, not only has no regard for God, they don't even have a regard for the law. They don't have a regard for the Constitution of the United States. God will not allow what has been set apart unto Him to be desecrated. It'd have been better in the founding of this great nation if no one would have ever even came up with the idea of one nation under God, than to have that concept and then to desecrate it. Think about it. That happened because people realized that this could have never happened, the founding of this country and the bringing together at all one time in one place these extremely brilliant men. And they come up with the Constitution of the United States. It's just an incredible document. And somehow with the vision that can only be supplied by God Himself, was able to foresee the things that could happen down the road. And amazing. Thomas Jefferson said that about the time when all may be lost with our liberty, he believed that the American people would wake up and take it back. Well, folks, it's time to wake up. We need to wake up in the Lord's church, and we need to wake up in this nation. And in my brain, these two things, I don't know how you can really understand one without the other. God has given us this freedom, this thing that we enjoy in this country, so that we can take the gospel to the world. Not to just live it out with our own carnal desires. You know, most people today, and this has to do with the dedicated vessels that they went to get. You know, most people today know that, drinking, can lead to foolish actions. Now, the Bible says you should never, listen, you can eat too many mashed potatoes, which, believe it or not, has a content, some molecular thing that it'll affect you like alcohol, and you can become drunk on that mashed potatoes. You know, we should make sure we never lose our sober-mindedness. Why? Because it's the devil's playground. Alcohol is our greatest drug problem in this nation, and it's legal. Alcohol kills 25 times as many people as illegal drugs. 25 times as many. But if you add up all the causes of death and add them all together, they don't add up to how many babies are aborted in this nation every year. But somehow we think that voting and that is two separate issues. Oh, folks, seriously. Really. Alcohol is the greatest cause of crime in this country. Now, I'm not saying that heroin isn't a big deal and that all the other types of drugs that people are taking, they're all a big deal. Belshazzar called for the sacred vessels, stolen from the temple in Jerusalem, vessels set apart unto the glory of God. They had been prayed over and dedicated to the Lord. If you know anything about American history at all, which isn't being taught even in our schools anymore, civics, nothing else, you would know that this country was prayed over and dedicated unto God. And what happens in this country means something to God. Many of our nation's founders were people of faith. They may not have exactly agreed with everything that we think, but they still believed. They set a new course for nations, a course of liberty. They hoped our nation would bring the glory of God, to the world. A nation set apart, prayed over, dedicated to God. One nation under God. But now, as in Belshazzar's day, many things are out of control. Abortion, alcoholism, drugs, homosexuality, AIDS. I could stand up here for 3 hours and just continue that list. You all know what I'm talking about. Homes are falling apart. 71% of all black children born are born out of wedlock. 36% of all white children are born out of wedlock. And we wonder why our society is disintegrating? Seriously. So crime marches on and takes more and more victims. You're actually safer in some third world countries than you would be on the streets of Chicago. Seriously. It's a war zone. And so, violence reigns, entertainment reigns, life. Millions have no time for God. We need a revival in the church. We need a revival in this country. We need a revival to turn America from ruin and judgment. I think about what's happened in the last 4 years or 6 years, whatever it's been, how that we have elected certain individuals to go to Congress and the Senate expecting certain things to happen. But once they got there, they changed their tune. We need to seriously become informed. We need to understand what's going on. And it needs to happen in the church. I want to say that we have the same God as was in the days of Babylon. We have the same God. God does not change. The God that was upset about what he's seen going on with his people and with the things that were dedicated to him, it's the same God as today. That's why we can preach out of the Old Testament. The principles does not change. The night of feasting became a night of fear. The night of judgment became a night of terror. There is a point at which sin is judged. I don't want to use the word lucky because I don't really believe in luck. Okay? We are the most blessed people on the planet. We live in a free country. We can generally go home at night and lay our heads down on our beds and not be, have one of us stay up all night and guard the house. We send our kids off to school, and for the most part, we know they're safe there. We can drive to work, and for the most part, we're not worried about hitting bombs along the roadside, at least not yet. We are so blessed. But you cannot continue in sin, Paul said, that grace may abound. Okay? There is going to come a judgment. The writing was on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Daniel was called to interpret the writing. Belshazzar had been weighed and found wanting. It is my prayer, and all of us need to go home and pray that God's will be done in this election. And it's my prayer that God is not yet ready to judge this nation. Because truly, if he is, there's nothing you and I are going to be able to say or do that is going to change that. But if we get a second chance, we need to seize the moment. We need to not entangle ourselves with the things of this world. And you know, I was thinking about this idea of we need to be focused. We need not to have our attention divided. You understand what divided attention is? That's the way my life feels every single day of the week. I got the business, I got this, I got that going on. And you know, it can be very difficult at times. But when it comes to our faith and our practice, we need to have undivided attention given to the work of the Lord and not compromise. You know, we need to focus and take advantage of it. That night, the mighty Babylon fell. Is the writing on the wall for America? I hope not. I really do. I know this, whatever happens, God's people are the only ones getting out of this place alive. That's the good news. But wouldn't you really like to have a little more time if God will give it to us? If He sees that our hearts are not hardened and that we have repented and we're willing to become the living sacrifices that we need to be, because His Son was a blood sacrifice. He's not asking us to die. He's asking us to live for Jesus. Are you willing to live for Jesus? Are you willing to let America's revival start in you? That's the question. We're going to sing a hymn of invitation.